today's message, which is going to be called A Dance of Dark and Light. And I want to start with a little apology because in our weekly newsletter, I had said that today's message is going to be called A Dance of Light and Dark. And then as I thought about it the rest of the week, I felt like A Dance of Dark and Light just rolls off the tongue a lot better. And so if you brought a friend and you said, hey, this message is going to be the Dance of Light and Dark, I apologize for just misleading. And I think clarity and transparency is a real big value here. So I just wanted to start clearing the air. This past Thursday was the Spring Equinox, and there's a couple of things that we think about during the equinox. Certainly the beginning of spring, which even talking to some folks today, it's many people's favorite season. It's one of the most beautiful parts about living here. When people ask us, what we love about living in Tucson, we talk about all the blooms, both the sights and also the aromas of the blooming flowers during this season. So it's one of the best times of year around here. But the spring equinox is also some other things, has some other meanings for us. Like perhaps this year, the spring equinox was a reminder that you have about 3 weeks left to do your taxes. There are those of you out there for which this is not a necessary reminder. You did them all the way back in February. And then there's some people, that shall not be named, who need that reminder, need a little bit of a push. Another thing is that the equinox, this year in particular, happened to fall on National Ravioli Day. A pasta which I think is pretty underrated, so just maybe spend some time thinking about ravioli and even eating it, so. But I think most importantly, something that we often gloss over is the fact that the equinox is that day in which the entire planet, more or less, experiences a balance of day and night. A balance, a moment of equilibrium in this dance of dark and light. As our resident science explainer, Neil deGrasse Tyson, plainly puts it, the equinox is the moment when the Earth's tilt lines up with the sun, giving us nearly equal day and night everywhere on the planet. Something I want us to notice immediately. The earth has a tilt, okay? The earth is tilted. How many of you, if you're being honest, you look at your journey, you look at your life, you go, I'm a little tilted, right? Right? I'm not exactly normal. I'm not always, I'm a little bit off center. Maybe there's many of you would say, well, the reason that I'm here in a space like this today is because I'm a little tilted. I know that that's true for me. And yet something that I want us to recognize is that seasons, the equinox, this aspect of the way that our earth moves that actually allows for life, that allows for growth, that allows for change, this doesn't happen. These things don't happen in spite of the earth's tilt. They happen because of the earth's tilt. The earth's tilt creates life. It creates possibility. It creates opportunity. So when you think about your own journey, perhaps you would be a little willing to embrace the fact that we all are a little bit tilted. We recently put out some t-shirts and we're already thinking about the next round of t-shirts. And so, I'm kind of thinking about going with this tilted theme. So I would love to run some t-shirt designs by you if you're open. Tilt happens. Or I'm with tilted. I'm just workshopping right now, so I'll take it back to the lab. But something I want us to consider when we talk about the planet, when we talk about these celestial happenings, I'd like you to consider that everything that happens out there is also happening in here, right? Maybe even we go so far as to say that there is no out there, because we are the earth, right? What the earth does, what the earth experiences, we experience. When it comes to the tilt, when it comes to the dance of dark and light that happens around the equinox, may we see it in the planet and may we see it in ourselves. Because in many ways, these spiritual journeys that we go on, they are really about rediscovering that which has always been true. And one way we might look at this is to see that the equinox is something that outlasts any religion, right? Any spiritual tradition. It even outlasts life on this planet. It is so incredibly ancient and inherent to this planet that certainly there is wisdom and truth that we can draw from it. And so today, the invitation is that we might notice three things about the equinox, three different aspects or attributes of the equinox, and really to see ourselves in these things. And the first thing that we're going to notice about the equinox is that it is this moment in time in which light and dark coexist in perfect harmony, in perfect equality, in perfect equilibrium. Light and dark coming together in equal measure. Now, something that really struck me when I first moved to Tucson is how dark it gets at night, which is great because it makes for great star viewing. There's also a night speed limit here, which is not something that I grew up with. And so I don't know if any of you actually follow the night speed limit. 6 p.m. rolls around, you're like, oh, got to drop it 5 miles per hour. The night cops are going to be paying attention. But, as human beings in the modern world, we have this interesting experience around the day and the night because we have artificial light. And so in many ways, there's a difference between the way we experience day and night and the way our ancestors experienced day and night. We might look at it and say that our ancestors had a stronger relationship between the day and the night and the light and the dark because their lives were more oriented around these changes, right? And so for them, we might imagine that in a deeper way, light and the daytime represented clarity and the known and the ordinary world and ordinary life, while the dark represented the unknown and mystery and even the non-ordinary world, the dream world, right? And yet what we've done in our modern day is we've turned the dark into that which is evil, right? Perhaps we have Star Wars to thank for that, right? The light side and the dark side. But I find it helpful to think about the dark in terms of shadow. That there are things in our lives, there are things in our spiritual journeys that are at play, some of which we see and are aware of, some of which we don't see and are not aware of, right? This is the interplay between light and shadow within our own spiritual experiences, our own consciousnesses, our own psyche. And yet what our modern world has done is it's placed all the emphasis on the light and taken away emphasis on the dark, both literally, right, with the way that we can control through artificial light, but also figuratively speaking, right? We focus on the light, we avoid the dark, and we treat them as enemies. But Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us that, no, they are not enemies. They are halves of the same whole, meeting in perfect union at the equinox. The religion that I grew up in, the evangelical Christianity that was taught to me from a fairly young age, in that experience, I wasn't told that there is a value in a perfect union of light and dark, that there is a balance that we find within ourselves of both the light, that which is seen and understood, and the shadow, that which we have yet to more fully explore. I wasn't taught that. Nor was I taught that in the Old Testament, of the very scriptures that all these teachings came from my own scripture book, I wasn't taught that the most ancient understanding of God from the ancient Hebrew people was not a God that embodied the light in opposition to the dark, but it was understood that God was the source of both the light and dark. This is how the ancient Hebrew people spoke of and talked about God. And yet this is not something that I was told growing up. Instead, what I was told is that we must, as human beings, choose between the light and the dark without recognizing that both are present within us, and that an experience of wholeness is an experience of embracing all of who we are, not just who we would like ourselves to be. But then in the 18th and 19th centuries, a man named Carl Jung came around, and he started talking about the shadow and the subconscious and the parts that we've so often considered dark and evil actually as that which is just yearning to be understood and brought into the light. And he said this, I find this to be really interesting, and I'd encourage you to sit with this for a moment. He said, I'd rather be whole than good. I'd rather be whole than good. I'd rather be a whole person than just what a current understanding of society says is good. Because what even is good, right? How many of us were given this understanding, or we were taught from a young age that the best thing that we could do in our lives, the most important thing that we could do, was be a good girl or a good boy, right? That was our role. That was our job. And yet perhaps we came up in a family that repressed or denied the full weight of the human experience. Or perhaps we came up in a faith tradition that encouraged us, even demanded that we cut off aspects of ourselves in order to fit in order to live within a particular standard of what is good. And so we end up cutting off perhaps aspects of our sexuality, right? Even going so far as to in many, religious contexts, looking at the very body, that which gives us life, that which sustains us, looking at that as evil and cutting off that as part of the holistic human experience. These are ideas that can do incredible harm, right? And they in fact push us away from a sense of wholeness and integration. But perhaps that journey into wholeness is also that journey in embracing the fact that we all are tilted, right? We all are a mix of light and dark. There's a contemporary of Jung named Alfred Adler who said, the only normal people are the ones you don't know very well. There's a paradox that I've found as I've kind of observed in my own life and just out in the world, and perhaps you've noticed this too. We encounter different types of people, right? And there are sometimes we encounter people who embrace the fact that we are all flawed, that we are all complicated, that being a human is very messy, right? These are people that we might consider to be real, even at the expense of not fitting in with certain social norms, right? And it's those people that I tend to feel safer with, that I feel a sense of trust with, people who are honest and authentic about the complexities of being human. And yet, on the other hand, we sometimes encounter people who pretend to have it all figured out, who pretend to be holy or enlightened. This often comes in the form of religious leaders, right? And it's often these people that sometimes harbor some hidden behaviors, right? Some things that are harmful, people that we don't necessarily feel as inclined to trust, right? And so, friends, the invitation is, may we make peace with and even find this unlikely marriage between dark and light, right? Valuing wholeness and integration over normalcy, right? Or over a particular concept of what is good. And we have this beautiful reminder from poet, songwriter Leonard Cohen in his song anthem, "Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Friends, don't deny or reject those cracks, those tilts. Remember that that's how the light enters. All right, that's point number one. We still good? You still with me? All right. Number two, the equinox, beyond just this marriage of light and dark, the equinox is a reminder that opposites can live in balance within us, and perhaps there is beauty and life and vitality when we can bring opposites together. But this is going to require us to enter into the realm of paradox, opposites coexisting. And yet paradox is something that we don't always have the easiest time with. Certainly our society doesn't always allow for opposites to coexist. Often our culture requires that we define ourselves in a very particular way, right? Or maybe our families, maybe we grew up in a family system where we had a very particular role, very particular and specific expectations set upon us. And yet the reality is we are far more complex than that. And there is this balance that we strike between aspects of ourselves that don't necessarily seem to fit together. But if we can create some space and be open-minded, we can find ways for opposites to create a sense of balance. But the thing about balance, friends, is that it often comes in the form of tension. I'm going to give you an example. I need a little prop. Hold on. Okay, we've all seen that image of the tightrope walker, right? And they have their pole, and they use the pole to create balance, but they're swaying, right? There is a dance, right? I've obviously never done this before, and I never will, but I'm pantomiming it as best I can. There's a sway, there's a balance, there's a almost pendulum-like motion as there's weight shifted from one side, and then corrections are made, and then overcorrections are made. And what we see is that balance is not something that we arrive at. It is not a state that we are perpetually in. Balance is something that we are always finding, right? Movement after movement, correction after correction. So something I want to encourage you to do is to think about how these different opposites that we experience in our lives, which we're going to name, don't worry, that we, when we find balance between them, we are also always in this dance and in this tension. But it is by participating in that dance that we find a sense of wholeness, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I just want to name for you, for me, some opposites that we experience in our lives that actually have the opportunity to come into perfect harmony, right? Or at least one that we're always working out. And if you think of any others, I encourage you to note them down because we're going to have an opportunity to share them in a smaller group during our discussion time. So if you think of any other opposites that show up for you in your life, good, hold on to those. I'm just going to name a few general ones. There are the opposites of joy and pain that exist simultaneously in our lives, right? And we try to find balance between joy and pain. Because if all we do, right, is we lean over on this side and all we do is emphasize joy, we've all encountered that person where all they talk about is everything that's good that's going on in their life, right? And you're like, do you ever have difficulties? Do you ever have a bad day, right? If all we do is emphasize joy and we never are honest about the difficulties, the sorrow, the pain, the fear, what we end up with is a life that is inauthentic, right? And often people can't even connect to us because of that inauthenticity. On the other hand, if all we do is lean on pain and difficulty, right, and all we focus on is what's going wrong, then perhaps that person is missing out on the larger reality that there is also always something to be grateful for and to cherish and to value and to take joy in. So we find that middle ground, that balance point between the two. Here's another. We live in a balance, we live in this state of tension between giving and receiving, right? I find this to be, really well illustrated in the in-breath and the out-breath. We need both, right? We can't just survive off of an in-breath, right? And we can't just receive. That actually isn't good for us, just to take and take without giving, right? Imagine a river that when it is dammed, when it is stopped, right? Imagine some cute beavers, they build a little dam and then they're having a good time, right? But the river stops and it starts to become dirty, right? And unclean, right? For a river to maintain its purity, there must be a flow in and a flow out, right? And in the same way, we can't just be all receive, no give. But by that same token, if all we do is give, which some of us, actually it's not my problem, but some people have this problem where they define themselves by how much they can give to others, right? And the reality is, friends, is that when we do that, we miss the reality that life also wants to give to you. Right? Life wants to give you gifts. You are worthy of being nourished. You're worthy of being filled up, right? So we don't want to live all in give and we don't want to live all in take. We live like a human being with a full in-breath and a full out-breath. We live in the balance between the two, a balance that Rumi spoke about as the balance between holding on and letting go, right? We find ourselves in these in-between spaces. We might even think of them as these liminal spaces. All right, I'm going to go into another one. It's an important one, and it's also one that requires some depth, and so I encourage you, let's go deep together, that we all experience a balance between the masculine and the feminine. And I don't mean between people. I don't mean in a couple there is a balance between masculine and feminine. I mean between every individual, inside every individual. There is a union, a tension, a balance between masculine energy and feminine energy. This idea might be new to you that every human being possesses both. This has nothing to do with gender or sex. This is about an energy of attributes, of qualities, right? That you can be male and have, plenty of feminine qualities. You can be female and have plenty male qualities. You can be non-binary or gender fluid, and you would have a lot to teach the rest of the world about how there is always a unique balance of these two energies, right? And so when we talk about qualities that are more specifically associated with men or women, you might say, well, I'm a woman, but I have those qualities that you're labeling as masculine. Exactly. That's exactly the point, that these are qualities. And so we tend to more traditionally consider the masculine energies grounded, structured, stability, direction and drive, protective, right? And meanwhile, the feminine energies are fluidity, intuition, creativity, nurture, receptivity. The reality is, friends, when we think about these different qualities, none of us are all one or the other, right? And if we lean really hard on one, we miss so many of the gifts of the other. So again, the encouragement is that we find balance between the two within ourselves. And then certainly it will flow out into our relationships. Last one. We find a balance in our lives between the spiritual and the material, right? Or between the divine and the human. Sometimes there is a trap that we fall into on the spiritual journey. I fall into it all the time. And it's a trap where we start to believe that the goal and the idea is to become so spiritual that our material lives, our human responsibilities just aren't important anymore, right? That we get to a point where we neglect that which is human, that which is material. And this can often manifest itself as an unreliability, right? Imagine that you and I make plans, right? And I say, I'm going to meet you at 6 p.m. And then 6 p.m. rolls around. I'm not there. 6:15, 6:30, I'm still not there. So you give me a call, and you're like, hey, Jake, I thought we were going to meet at 6. And I respond to you, well, time isn't real. All points and all experiences are happening simultaneously. And so 6 p.m. is an illusion. It's a human-created idea. Spiritually, you are beyond all that. So it's unlikely that you're going to want to make plans with me again. Or say Olivia texts me and she says, hey, can you pick up some romaine lettuce on your way home for dinner? And I text back and I say, honey, you already have everything you need within. You're a manifester. Manifest it, okay? Manifest the lettuce. I don't think I'm eating dinner that night, right? So we can lose ourselves in the abstract and the spiritual and lose connection to the material. But of course, the opposite happens too, right? We can get so caught up in the material and the human and the everyday that we forget the spiritual aspect of life. And this can manifest itself as an over-seriousness, right? Like we all, I know most of us, we love that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin quote, that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And the reason why I think so many of us enjoy this is it's this helpful reminder. It brings us back to the reality that we are something more than the difficulties, the challenges, the everyday. And what this allows us to do is to return to a sense of play and to a sense of joy, right? And even a lightness. It's not a lightness that ignores or disregards the difficult and dark parts of our life. It transcends and yet includes all of who we are. Thomas Merton reminded us, gave us this great encouragement that it's not a matter of choosing between the spiritual and the material, but learning how to live in both, right? It is this point of balance. So friends, we try our best to accept our imperfections, to recognize that we are divine and human at the same time, and that maybe wholeness is living in that tension, being willing to enter into it, being willing to join the dance, right? Last point I want to make today about the equinox is that the equinox is a shift that happens, right? And it's not permanent, as we know, it's a moment where balance is found. It's not permanent. But it's not a shift that is made by the sun or the moon or the stars. It's a shift that the earth makes. Now, I want for a second to imagine, in this scenario, we're the earth, right? We're the earth. And the sun is like light and love and warmth. It's all that which wants to give, right? It's source, it's creator, it's God, whatever name you have for it, right? And we as the earth, what we recognize is this moment of balance comes through a shift that we make, right? It doesn't have to do with anything that's happening outside of us, right? Everything outside of us is consistent. We shift because of our tilt. We move through this dance because the sun is always giving the same amount of light. It is the earth that shifts, which modulates, which changes its ability to receive. So I want us to look at this in our own lives for a second, because sometimes in our lives, in our journeys, in our experience as moving through this life as a human being, sometimes life does not feel like an equinox. Right? Sometimes it does not feel like you are in a place of balance. Sometimes life feels more like a solstice, maybe the winter solstice, right? Where your life, maybe right now, feels like a long night. Maybe there's some of you out there where, for you, you feel like you're in more of a summer solstice. Your life feels like a long day. Or maybe you do feel like you're living in a bit of an equinox right now, in this place of balance between the two. But the reality, friends, is that light and love and hope is always there, always waiting to shower us, right? But it's our relationship to it, our place in the dance, that changes. How many of us have come out of a really difficult season of life, and you realize that in the grand scheme of things, your circumstances really hadn't changed? Right? The specifics of what was going on in your life hadn't changed. It was your perspective that had shifted dramatically, right? When we think about, however you might categorize your journey, a therapeutic journey, a spiritual journey, your personal growth, what these journeys so often show us is it's not about changing the specifics of your life so much as it is changing your perceptions, changing your awareness. Certainly, our lives change as a result of changed perception and changed awareness. But the core is about this journey of self-discovery. Deepak Chopra says it's the spiritual growth is not about changing who you are, but discovering who you have always been. Friends, like the earth, we're all tilted. We all participate in this dance between balance and imbalance, but it's important for us to remember that the sun never leaves. The sun has always been there, right? And so call it God, call it source, call it love. It's always with you. We shift in and out, right? The way that we relate to it might change day to day, but it is always giving. And so it's our opportunity, our invitation to say yes to it, to join in the dance, recognizing that it will always be there for us. There's a poem from the Sufi mystic Hafiz. He says, even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens with a light or a love like that. It lights the whole sky. Friends, right now, perhaps personally, but no doubt collectively, we're all facing a lot of unknowns, right? We face difficulty. We face fear. For you, spiritually, you would say, I am not in a moment of balance. I am not in an equinox right now. But when we look out, right, this equinox, this year, as the equinox gives way to spring, may it be a reminder that there will always be a return to balance. A balance found between day and night, between dark and light. And the light is always there for us. It'll always be there each morning, tilted as we are, because of our tilt. And we will always find our way back to it. So the invitation today is not to be perfect. It is not to be normal, right? It is not always to have that perfect sense of balance, but that wholeness is found in the midst of the tension, in the midst of the struggle, as we join that dance of dark and light.